What does it actually take to catch the eye of one of South Korea's most powerful music executives? Not talent alone, not luck alone. Park Jin-young, the man behind Twice, 2PM, and Wonder Girls, has built and broken hundreds of careers. He knows within seconds whether someone belongs on his stage. So when he sat down and personally walked through how each of the 8 Stray Kids members ended up in his company, the stories he told weren't the polished origin myths you'd expect from a corporate press release. They were raw. A kid spotted on the street who almost walked away, a backup dancer for another group who showed up to an audition with 0 vocal training, a 13-year-old from Sydney who left everything behind on a gamble, an idol hopeful who failed his first audition and came back anyway. 8 completely different paths, some through open calls, some through sheer accident, one through years of invisible patience, all funneling into a single reality show where elimination was real and the pressure nearly broke them. JYP didn't sugarcoat any of it. Here's how 8 strangers became Stray Kids, in the order they were found. Number 8. The boy who waited 7 years. Bang Chan. Christopher Bang grew up in Sydney, Australia, the kind of kid who could have gone in 1,000 different directions. Born on October 3, 1997, he was athletic, social, fluent in English, and had a life in front of him that most people would consider perfectly fine. But somewhere around 2010, when he was barely 13 years old, JYP Entertainment held a global audition in Australia, and Bang Chan showed up. What happened next would define not just his life, but the future of an entire group that didn't exist yet. He passed. And that's where the easy part ended. Park Jin-young's system was built on a simple but brutal principle. Train until you're ready, and if you're never ready, you never debut. There was no guaranteed timeline, no contract that promised a stage. You trained, you improved, you waited, and you hoped that the company would eventually build a group around you or slot you into one. Bang Chan packed up his life in Sydney and moved to Seoul alone as a teenager. He barely spoke Korean, he had no family nearby, he was dropped into a system alongside dozens of other trainees who were just as hungry, just as talented, and in many cases far more prepared for the specific demands of the Korean entertainment industry. The language barrier alone would have broken most people. Korean isn't just a language you pick up casually, it's a completely different grammatical structure from English, with levels of formality that affect how you speak to every single person around you. Bang Chan had to learn all of that while simultaneously keeping up with grueling vocal lessons, dance training, and performance evaluations that could determine whether he stayed or got sent home. And he did keep up. For a while, that was enough, but a while turned into a year, and a year turned into 2, and then 3, and then the real psychological toll began. Because the hardest part of being a long-term trainee at a major entertainment company isn't the physical training, it's watching other people debut. During his years at JYP, Bang Chan trained alongside members who would go on to form GOT7, Day 6, and Twice. He watched them get selected, get announced, get the debut date that every trainee dreams about. He was in the building when Twice went through 16, their own survival show, and came out the other side as one of the biggest girl groups on the planet. He was still there when Day 6 launched, still there when GOT7 was already touring internationally. Every debut that wasn't his was a reminder that the system didn't owe him anything. Park Jin-young later acknowledged just how long Bang Chan had been in the system, and the fact that he never once complained, never publicly expressed bitterness, and never stopped working was something that clearly made an impression at the executive level. Most trainees who go past the 3-year mark without a debut either leave voluntarily or start to lose the spark that got them noticed in the first place. Bang Chan did the opposite. He started producing. Somewhere during those long years of waiting, he got access to studio equipment and began teaching himself how to write and arrange music. This wasn't part of the standard trainee curriculum. JYP Entertainment trained performers, not necessarily producers. But Bang Chan was filling the hours he wasn't spending in dance practice or vocal lessons by learning DAWs, studying song structure, and quietly building a skill set that no one had asked him to build. And this is where Park Jin-young made a decision that would change everything. Instead of slotting Bang Chan into an existing group concept the way most companies would, JYP gave him something almost unheard of in the K-pop industry: creative authority. The instruction, as it's been discussed in interviews and on the Stray Kids reality show, was essentially this: you pick the members. You know who works well together, you know who complements your style, you know what kind of group you want to build. JYP trusted a trainee, not a creative director, not a senior producer, not a debuted artist, but a trainee with the responsibility of assembling a team from scratch. That level of trust was not normal. In an industry where debut lineups are typically decided in boardrooms by executives analyzing market data, giving that power to a 20-year-old who hadn't even released a song yet was a genuine risk. But Park Jin-young had watched Bang Chan for 7 years. He'd seen him outlast dozens of trainees who came and went. He'd seen him develop from a kid who could barely order food in Korean into someone who could write, produce, and perform in a language that wasn't his first. And perhaps most importantly, he'd seen how other trainees responded to him. Bang Chan had become a natural center of gravity in the training rooms, the person younger trainees went to for help, the one who stayed late to work with others on their weak points, the one who kept morale together when the uncertainty of trainee life got heavy. Before the Stray Kids reality show ever aired, before the public knew any of these names, Bang Chan had already started forming the core of what would become the group. He and 2 other trainees, Han and Changbin, had formed a producing and rap unit called 3racha, uploading tracks to SoundCloud under pseudonyms. They were making music together not because the company told them to, but because they wanted to. That chemistry was real, and it was already producing results before any cameras were rolling. 7 years of training, 7 years of watching others debut, 7 years of silence from a kid who moved across the world at 13 because he believed in something he couldn't guarantee. When Park Jin-young finally gave him the green light, Bang Chan didn't just step into the opportunity, he'd been building it, piece by piece, for the better part of a decade. But choosing members means someone has to be chosen, and the next person Bang Chan identified had a resume that nobody at JYP expected, because he'd already been performing on some of the biggest stages in K-pop, just not under his own name. Number 7. The backup dancer who stepped into the spotlight, Lee No. Before Lee Min-ho ever set foot inside JYP Entertainment as a trainee, he was already performing in front of tens of thousands of people. The problem was, nobody in those audiences knew his name. Born on October 25, 1998 in Gimpo, South Korea, Lee Min-ho had been dancing seriously for years when he landed a gig that most aspiring performers would consider a career highlight in itself. He became a backup dancer for BTS. This wasn't some small club appearance or a low-budget music video cameo. Lee Min-ho was on stage during one of the most explosive periods in BTS's rise, performing alongside them during their promotional activities around 2016 and 2017, a time when BTS was transitioning from a popular Korean act into a global phenomenon. He was part of the choreography, hitting the same marks, executing the same formations, performing under the same lights. But when the music stopped and the cameras cut, the spotlight didn't follow him, it followed the 7 members whose names were on the marquee. That experience did something interesting to Lee Min-ho. Instead of settling into the backup dancer circuit, which is a legitimate and stable career path in the Korean entertainment industry, it sharpened something in him. He didn't want to be behind someone else. He wanted his own stage. So he showed up to a JYP Entertainment Open Audition in 2017, and he got in. On paper, that sounds straightforward. In practice, it meant walking into a company where trainees had been grinding for years, some of them for the better part of a decade, and trying to catch up to their level in a fraction of the time. Bang Chan had been there for 7 years. Other trainees in the building had 3, 4, 5 years of JYP-specific training behind them. Lee Man-ho had months. His dance ability was never in question. That much was obvious to anyone who watched him move for more than 10 seconds. The fluidity, the precision, the sheer physical control he brought to choreography put him in a category that most trainees spend years trying to reach. Park Jin-young himself recognized this almost immediately.
But JYP Entertainment didn't debut dancers, they debuted complete performers. And the definition of complete at JYP meant vocals, stage presence, emotional delivery, variety show instincts, and the ability to connect with a camera in a way that made audiences feel like you were talking directly to them. Dance was one piece of a much larger puzzle, and Lee Min-ho's other pieces were raw. His vocal training was minimal compared to trainees who had been taking lessons for years. His on-camera personality, the kind of relaxed, witty, natural charm that Korean variety shows demand, hadn't been developed in the way that long-term trainees learn to cultivate over time. He was, in the most literal sense, a specialist trying to become a generalist in an environment that punished gaps. When the Stray Kids reality show began filming in 2017, Lee Man-ho was placed among the group as a potential member. The show was designed by Park Jin-young as a proving ground, a way to test whether these trainees could function as a unit under pressure, create music together, perform together, and handle the psychological weight of knowing that the public was watching them be judged in real time. For most of the trainees, this was the culmination of years of preparation. For Lee Min-ho, it was essentially a crash course with cameras rolling. And for a while, he held his own. His dance performances were consistently among the strongest in the group. When choreography was involved, he elevated the people around him simply by being in formation. But Park Jin-young was watching for something more than individual skill. He was watching for cohesion. He was watching for whether each member could contribute to the group's identity in a way that went beyond their strongest discipline. And at a certain point in the show, JYP made a decision that hit like a freight train. He eliminated Lee Min-ho from the lineup. The reaction in the room was visceral. The other trainees didn't take it quietly. There were tears, there was visible shock, and there was a sense that something fundamentally wrong had just happened. Bang Chan, who had been entrusted with helping build this group, was openly emotional. The members who had been training alongside Lee Min-ho had already started to see him as part of the team, and ripping him out of that fabric left a wound that was visible on camera. What made the elimination particularly painful was that it wasn't a reflection of failure, it was a reflection of timing. JYP didn't say Lee Min-ho wasn't talented enough, he didn't say he couldn't be an idol. The issue, as JYP framed it, was about readiness. Lee Min-ho hadn't had the same runway as the other trainees. The things that years of training naturally develop, the instinct for when to pull back and when to push forward, the comfort in front of a camera that has nothing to do with choreography, the ability to be vulnerable on stage in a way that creates connection rather than just admiration, those things take time, and Lee Min-ho simply hadn't had enough of it. But here's what Park Jin-young also saw, and what ultimately changed the outcome. During the period after his elimination, Lee Min-ho didn't disappear, he didn't retreat. By all accounts, shared during and after the show, he continued working as if the elimination was a pause, not an ending. And the remaining members didn't move on from him either. His absence was felt in rehearsals, in group dynamics, in the sound and shape of the unit that was trying to solidify without him. The group with Lee Min-ho and the group without him were two different entities, and the one without him felt incomplete in a way that was hard to articulate but impossible to ignore. Park Jin-young reversed the elimination. Lee Min-ho was brought back into the group, and when he returned, something had shifted. The short period away had forced him to confront exactly what he needed to develop, and it lit a fire that pure training might never have ignited. He came back sharper, more present, more willing to push into the areas that had been his weaknesses. The backup dancer who once stood behind one of the world's biggest groups was now standing in his own formation, in his own group, with his own name on the stage. JYP later reflected on Lee No's journey as one of the most compressed transformations he'd witnessed, from a specialist with undeniable physical talent to a performer who could hold his own across every dimension the industry demanded. The gap between where Lee Min-ho started at JYP and where he ended up was staggering, made even more remarkable by the fact that he closed it in a time frame that most people in the industry would have called impossible. But if Lee No's path into Stray Kids was a sprint against the clock, the next member's story was the opposite, a slow, deliberate burn that started in the Seam underground producing sessions where Bang Chan was quietly building the group's musical DNA.
Number 6. The rapper who wrote his way in, Changbin. So Changbin didn't walk into JYP Entertainment with the kind of story that makes for an easy headline. There was no dramatic international relocation, no prior career on someone else's stage, no years-long odyssey through the training system. Born on August 11, 1999 in Yongin, South Korea, he was a local kid who liked rap and showed up to an audition because he thought he was good enough. The thing is, he was right. Changbin entered JYP Entertainment as a trainee around 2016, and from the moment he opened his mouth in a training room, something was immediately clear. This wasn't a kid who had casually decided to try the idol route because it looked glamorous. He had spent years studying rap on his own, dissecting the mechanics of delivery, flow, breath control, and the architecture of how words land when they're performed rather than just spoken. Korean hip-hop has its own deeply rooted culture, separate from the idol industry, and Changbin had clearly been drinking from that well long before he ever considered auditioning for an entertainment company. His style was aggressive, technically dense, and fast in a way that didn't sacrifice clarity for speed. When Changbin rapped, every syllable hit its mark. Park Jin-young's system was built to identify trainees who brought something that couldn't easily be taught, and raw rap ability at the level Changbin possessed was exactly that kind of asset. You can train someone to hold a note, you can train someone to hit choreography on beat, but the internal rhythm that separates a competent rapper from one who commands a room, that's either there or it isn't. Changbin had it from day one. But what made him valuable to Bang Chan specifically wasn't just the rapping, it was what happened after the training sessions ended. Bang Chan had been spending his nights in the JYP studio, teaching himself production, writing songs that nobody had asked him to write, building a catalog of tracks that existed purely because he couldn't stop creating. When Changbin arrived in the training system, Bang Chan recognized something in him almost immediately, not just a performer, but a writer. Changbin wasn't content to simply deliver other people's words. He needed to write his own, and the things he wrote about were not the safe, commercially polished topics that most trainees gravitating toward idol life would default to. Changbin wrote about pressure, about insecurity, about the gap between where he was and where he wanted to be, about the fear that he wasn't enough, that the industry would chew him up and discard him before he ever got the chance to prove what he could do. His lyrics were uncomfortably honest in a way that the Korean idol system doesn't typically encourage. Trainees are generally taught to project confidence, polish, and aspirational perfection. Changbin's writing did the opposite. It pulled the curtain back and showed the mess underneath, and somehow that made it more compelling, not less. Under the pseudonym SPEARB, a rearrangement of the letters in his name, Changbin became the second pillar of 3RACHA, the underground producing unit that Bang Chan was assembling in the shadows of the JYP training system. Together with Bang Chan, who operated under the name CB97, they started building tracks on SoundCloud that had no official connection to JYP Entertainment, no corporate oversight, no marketing strategy. These were raw, unfiltered songs songs made by trainees in borrowed studio time, uploaded to a platform where nobody knew who they were and nobody cared about their company affiliation. The music had to stand on its own, and it did. What 3RACHA revealed about Changbin was the depth of his musicality beyond just rap performance. He wasn't simply showing up to lay down verses that Bangchan had structured. He was actively involved in the creative process, contributing to arrangements, arguing about song direction, pushing the sound into territories that were harder-edged and more emotionally confrontational than what JYP Entertainment typically released. The dynamic between Bangchan and Changbin was complementary in a way that felt engineered but wasn't. Bangchan brought patience, structural thinking, and a producer's ear for how a complete song should feel from beginning to end. Changbin brought intensity, lyrical urgency, and a willingness to go to emotional places that made the music feel dangerous in the best possible sense. They balanced each other, and Park Jin-young noticed. During the Stray Kids reality show, Changbin's performances consistently demonstrated something that separated him from trainees who were technically skilled but emotionally guarded. When Changbin performed, there was a rawness to it that went beyond technique. You could see the stakes on his face. Every stage was personal to him in a way that couldn't be manufactured by coaching or camera angles. He rapped like someone who had genuinely considered the possibility that this might not work out, and that fear fueled his delivery rather than paralyzing it. JYP commented on this quality during the show, the recognition that Changbin brought an emotional authenticity that anchored the group's performances in something real. In a lineup that included technically gifted dancers and vocalists, Changbin was the raw nerve. He was the member who made you feel like what you were watching actually mattered to the people on stage, because for him, it visibly did. His position in the group was never seriously in doubt during the reality show, which in itself is telling. In a process designed to test, challenge, and potentially eliminate trainees, Changbin was one of the constants, a fixed point that the rest of the group orbited around musically. His writing, his production contributions, and his performance ability made him essential to the identity that Stray Kids was building in real time on camera. But there was another dimension to Changbin that the public wouldn't fully appreciate until after debut: his vulnerability off stage. Despite the ferocious energy of his performances, Changbin was openly emotional in group settings, quick to cry when moved, quick to express affection for the other members, and deeply affected by the pressures of the process in ways he didn't try to hide. That contrast, the rapper who could tear through a verse with terrifying intensity and then break down in tears during a group conversation 5 minutes later, became one of the most genuinely human elements of Stray Kids' identity. It wasn't calculated, it wasn't a concept, it was just who he was, and the group was better for it. Changbin proved that you didn't need a dramatic origin story or a decade of training to earn your place. Sometimes you just needed to be undeniably good at what you do and honest enough to put your real self into the work. He wrote his way into 3RACHA, performed his way through the survival show, and anchored himself into Stray Kids' DNA through sheer creative force. But 3RACHA was a three-person unit, and Bangchan and Changbin were only 2/3 of the equation. The final piece had been quietly sharpening his skills thousands of miles from Seoul in a JYP training outpost that most fans don't even know existed.
Number 5. The prodigy from across the border, Han. Han Jisung wasn't supposed to be in South Korea. Born on September 14, 2000 in Incheon, he had moved to Malaysia with his family as a child, settling into a life that had nothing to do with the Korean entertainment industry. Incheon was behind him. Seoul was a place on the news. The idol world was something happening in a different country to different people. But JYP Entertainment had a reach that extended far beyond the Korean peninsula. And one of the less publicized aspects of Park Jin-young's operation was a training pipeline in Malaysia, a satellite program designed to identify talent in Southeast Asia and funnel it toward the main system in Seoul. Han Jisung found that pipeline, and it found him, and what came next was one of the most quietly significant discoveries in JYP's history. What set Jisung apart from the moment he entered the system wasn't any single skill. It was the fact that he didn't have a single skill. He had all of them. In the Korean trainee world, you typically get categorized early. You're a vocalist, or you're a rapper, or you're a dancer, and your training is weighted accordingly. Jisung refused to fit into a category. He could rap with a speed and precision that rivaled trainees who had spent years doing nothing but perfecting their flow. He could sing with an emotional texture that didn't sound like a rapper trying to hold a melody. It sounded like a vocalist who happened to also be able to rap. And he could write. Not the kind of tentative, imitative writing that young trainees typically produce when they first start experimenting with lyrics, but fully realized compositions with structural awareness, emotional narrative, and a point of view that felt far too developed for someone his age. When Jisung eventually transferred from the Malaysian program to JYP's main training facility in Seoul, he was still a teenager. And walking into that building meant walking into a system where the hierarchy was built on seniority and accumulated skill. Trainees who had been there for years had established reputations, formed alliances, and carved out their identities within the company's internal ecosystem. Jisung was the new arrival from an overseas satellite program, and by every conventional measure, he should have spent his first year quietly learning the terrain. Instead, he ended up in a studio with Bang Chan. The connection between them was almost immediate, and it operated on a level that went beyond just musical compatibility. Both of them had lived outside of Korea. Both of them understood what it felt like to exist between two cultures, two languages, two versions of yourself, the person you are at home and the person you're trying to become in a system that demands total adaptation. Bang Chan had gone through that displacement as a 13-year-old Australian in Seoul. Jisung had experienced it in reverse. A Korean kid who had grown up in Malaysia and was now trying to re-enter a Korean world that had moved on without him. That shared understanding of cultural in-betweenness created a shorthand that made working together feel natural, in a way that pure musical chemistry alone wouldn't explain. Under the alias J.ONE, Jisung became the third and final member of 3 Ratcha, and his addition completed the unit in a way that fundamentally changed what it was capable of producing. Bang Chan brought the production architecture and the patience. Changbin brought the intensity and the lyrical rawness. Jisung brought versatility and the ability to bridge the gap between the two. He could match Changbin's aggressive energy on a rap verse, and then shift into a melodic hook that gave the song an emotional landing point. He was the connective tissue, the member who could adapt to whatever the track needed and deliver it at a level that didn't feel like a compromise. The 3 Ratcha tracks uploaded to SoundCloud during this period are a study in how 3 people with distinct creative identities can produce something that sounds unified without anyone disappearing into the blend. Jisung's contributions were recognizable. His voice had a quality that was impossible to mistake for anyone else's, slightly nasal, emotionally loaded, with a delivery that could pivot from playful to devastatingly sincere within the same verse. And his writing matched that range. Where Changbin wrote about external pressures and the fight to prove himself, Jisung's lyrics turned inward. He wrote about anxiety, not as an abstract concept or a lyrical device, but as a lived experience that shaped how he moved through the world. The self-doubt, the overthinking, the sensation of being trapped inside your own head, while the world outside keeps demanding that you perform confidence you don't actually feel. These weren't themes that most 17-year-olds in the K-pop trainee system were willing to put on paper, let alone perform publicly. But Jisung did it without hesitation, and the honesty of it was disarming. Park Jin-young, during the Stray Kids reality show, identified Jisung as one of the members whose overall package was the most complete. This was a significant assessment coming from someone who had built his career on identifying and developing well-rounded performers. JYP didn't say Jisung was the best rapper, or the best singer, or the best dancer in the group. He said Jisung was the most complete, meaning the gap between his strongest and weakest skills was the narrowest. In a group setting, that kind of versatility is worth more than any single exceptional talent, because it means the member can fill whatever role the performance demands at any given moment. Need a rap verse that hits hard? Jisung. Need an emotional vocal bridge that makes the audience feel something? Jisung. Need someone to write the song in the first place? Jisung. That adaptability made him invaluable during the reality show and even more so after debut, when Stray Kids music began to demand increasingly complex arrangements that required members to move fluidly between singing, rapping, and performing with equal conviction. But there was a cost to that versatility, and Jisung has been more open about it than most idols in his position would dare to be. The anxiety he wrote about in his early lyrics didn't go away when the camera started rolling. In many ways, the pressure of the reality show and the public scrutiny that came with it amplified everything. He has spoken in interviews and during fan communications about the genuine psychological difficulty of performing under conditions where every moment is being evaluated, recorded, and broadcast. The fact that he continued to deliver at the level he did while carrying that internal weight is not something that should be glossed over with inspirational language. It was hard. He did it anyway. That's the fact of it. Jisung completed 3 Racha, and 3 Racha became the creative engine that would power Stray Kids long after the reality show ended. But a group isn't built on producers and rappers alone. It needs performers who command attention the moment they step on stage. And the next member to enter JYP's orbit didn't even have to audition, because the company came to him on a street in Seoul and made the first move. Number 4. The face that stopped a scout in the street. Hyunjin. The Korean entertainment industry runs on a practice that would seem absurd in almost any other professional context: street casting. Major companies employ scouts whose literal job is to walk through busy areas of Seoul, scanning crowds of teenagers for faces that have the right bone structure, the right proportions, the right indefinable quality that reads as star potential before a single note has been sung or a single step has been danced. It sounds superficial because, in many ways, it is. But it's also how some of the biggest names in K-pop history were discovered, and it's how Hwang Hyunjin entered JYP Entertainment's orbit. Born on March 20, 2000 in Seoul, Hyunjin was walking down the street. Accounts place this around 2015, when he was roughly 15 years old, when a JYP casting agent approached him. The pitch would have been simple and direct because street casting in Korea operates on volume and speed. You look like you could be an idol, here's our card, come audition. Most teenagers who receive these cards throw them away. The ones who don't throw them away mostly fail the audition. The ones who pass the audition mostly wash out of the training system within a year. The funnel is brutal at every stage, and being scouted for your appearance is the lowest rung of a very tall ladder that only gets harder to climb. Hyunjin didn't throw the card away. He showed up and JYP Entertainment accepted him as a trainee. But here's the thing about being scouted for your face. It creates a burden that other trainees don't carry. When you audition your way in, you've already proven a skill. You sang well enough, or you danced well enough, or you rapped well enough that the company said yes based on ability. When you're street cast, you walk in with a question mark hanging over everything except your appearance. Can he sing? Can he dance? Can he perform? Nobody knows yet. And the other trainees in the building, the ones who clawed their way through competitive auditions to earn their spots, are watching to see whether the pretty face can actually back it up. Hyunjin's starting point in the JYP training system was, by his own admission in various interviews, behind the curve. He wasn't a trained dancer. He didn't have years of vocal lessons behind him. He didn't come from a performing arts background or a family with entertainment industry connections. He was a teenager who happened to have a face that stopped a professional scout in the middle of a Seoul sidewalk, and now he was standing in practice rooms next to people like Bang Chan, who had been training for half a decade, and Changbin, who could already wrap circles around most debut artists. The gap was real, and it was visible, and closing it required something that couldn't be scouted on the street: work ethic. Hyunjin enrolled at the School of Performing Arts Seoul, commonly known as SOPA, which is one of the most well-known performing arts high schools in Korea. The student body reads like a directory of current and future idols. Trainees from virtually every major entertainment company pass through SOPA's halls, and the environment is simultaneously supportive and intensely competitive. You're surrounded by peers who are all chasing the same dream, which means every dance class, every vocal evaluation, every performance showcase is an informal audition in front of people who understand exactly how good you need to be. For Hyunjin, SOPA and the JYP training system ran in parallel, creating a schedule that left almost no room for anything resembling a normal adolescence. School during the day, training at the company in the evening, practice on his own at night. The transformation that occurred over his roughly 2-year training period before the Stray Kids reality show was the kind of progression that trainers at JYP would later point to as evidence of what pure determination looks like when it's applied consistently. Hyunjin went from a raw recruit with no formal performance background to a dancer whose expressiveness and physicality became one of the most distinctive elements of the group's stage identity. His dance style developed into something that was less about technical precision, though he had that, and more about emotional translation. When Hyunjin danced, it looked like the music was passing through his body and being converted into movement in real time. There was an artistry to it that went beyond executing choreography correctly. He interpreted choreography, adding texture and intention to movements that other performers might deliver mechanically. Park Jin-young recognized this quality during the Stray Kids reality show, and his comments about Hyunjin reflected an understanding that what Hyunjin brought to the group wasn't easily replaceable. Visual impact in K-pop is often dismissed as shallow. The idea that someone's contribution is their appearance feels reductive in an industry that demands so much more than looks. But JYP's assessment of Hyunjin went deeper than that. The visual presence Hyunjin commanded on stage wasn't passive. It wasn't about standing still and being attractive. It was about how he used his physicality as a performance instrument, how his expression shifted with the emotional tone of a song, how his movement quality changed between aggressive choreography and softer, more fluid sequences, how his stage presence pulled focus not because he demanded it, but because he earned it through the specificity of his performance choices. During the reality show, Hyunjin's growth arc was one of the most visible among all the trainees. Viewers could literally track the improvement episode by episode. His confidence building, his technical skills sharpening, his ability to hold his own alongside members who had been performing for far longer becoming more and more apparent with each stage. He wasn't carried by the group. He climbed to the group's level and then kept climbing. What often gets overlooked in discussions about Hyunjin's development is the artistic sensibility that existed underneath the performance training. He is a visual artist in the literal sense. He paints, he draws, he engages with art as a discipline separate from music and dance. That creative instinct informed how he approached performance in ways that pure technical training wouldn't produce. His stages often felt like they had a visual artist's eye behind them, composed with an awareness of line, form, and negative space that gave his dancing a quality closer to contemporary art performance than standard K-pop choreography. The kid who was stopped on a Seoul street because a scout liked his face had become one of the most artistically distinctive performers in his generation, and he'd done it not by coasting on the gift that got him through the door but by building an entirely new set of skills from the ground up. The street cast trainee had become an artist. But not every path into JYP started with a lucky encounter or an underground SoundCloud project. The next member took the most traditional route possible, walked through the front door of an open audition, and delivered a performance so clean that the judges had almost nothing to critique. Number 3, the vocalist who won his way in, Seungmin. Kim Seungmin was born on September 22, 2000 in Seoul, South Korea. Growing up in a household where discipline and structure were daily expectations. Before contemplating a music career, his entire focus was on baseball. Deeply influenced by his grandfather, who had been an outstanding high school pitcher in his youth, Seungmin spent much of his childhood training to follow in those exact footsteps. His arm talent and focus culminated in him throwing the ceremonial first pitch for the Kia Tigers in 2010 at age 10. However, as he grew older, family circumstances and physical limitations forced him to abandon his athletic dreams. Seungmin simply redirected his intense focus toward a new passion: singing. He joined his school choir and, after entering Cheongdam High School in Gangnam, decided to pursue vocal music seriously. At Cheongdam High School, his classmates and teachers knew him not as an aspiring celebrity, but as an incredibly diligent student who never used his trainee status as an excuse to skip classes or neglect his homework, often arriving at school early despite practicing until the early morning hours. Unlike many other aspiring singers who relied purely on natural talent, Seungmin approached vocal training with the methodical mindset of an athlete. He studied the physiological aspects of singing, analyzing breath support, vocal cord closure, and acoustic resonance to build a stable, consistent vocal foundation. This systematic approach would prove invaluable when he decided to enter the public arena. In early 2017, JYP Entertainment announced its 13th Open Audition, a massive and notoriously difficult public talent search that attracted tens of thousands of young hopefuls from all across South Korea. For an independent teenager with no agency training or industry connections, entering such an audition was an act of sheer courage. He stood in lines for hours outside the audition venue in the freezing cold of January, holding a placard with his contestant number, surrounded by thousands of other teenagers practicing their scales and dances in the open air. The process was designed to filter out thousands of candidates through multiple intense rounds, where judges made split-second decisions based on brief performances in crowded rooms. Seungmin chose to perform Old Song by Exhibition, a classic Korean ballad that requires immense breath control, precise pitch, and deep emotional resonance to execute correctly. As the audition rounds progressed over several weeks, the vast majority of applicants were eliminated, but Seungmin's name consistently appeared on the passing lists due to his undeniable vocal stability and clean delivery. The judges were highly impressed by how he remained unfazed by the high-pressure environment, showing a level of composure that was rare for an untrained teenager. When the final showcase of the audition concluded in front of a live audience and top executives, Seungmin was awarded second place overall in the entire competition. This achievement was highly significant because a top finish in a JYP Open Audition guaranteed a direct contract as a trainee, bypassing the usual street casting or academy recommendation routes. Upon entering JYP Entertainment in early 2017, Seungmin was immediately thrown into a highly competitive environment where other trainees had been practicing for years. With only about 9 months between his entry into the company and the commencement of the Stray Kids survival show, he faced the monumental task of catching up to his peers in a fraction of the time. He had to learn the company's specific style, including Park Jin-young's famous half-air, half-sound singing technique, which emphasizes a natural, conversational delivery supported by deep breathing. To survive and thrive under this immense pressure, Seungmin developed a systematic practice routine that quickly became legendary within the company. He began keeping a detailed vocal diary, a notebook where he meticulously recorded his daily progress, the physical condition of his vocal cords, the specific feedback he received from trainers, his daily diet, and his sleeping patterns. This was not a temporary exercise. It became a permanent part of his life, allowing him to track his technical development with scientific precision. He would write down the exact angles of his mouth during vocal exercises, the temperature of his water, his room's humidity levels, and the precise warm-up routines that yielded the best vocal clarity. His room was constantly filled with the sound of humidifiers running, and he refused to speak in loud environments to preserve his throat, wearing heavy scarves even in mild weather to protect his vocal cords from cold drafts. While other trainees relied on natural instinct or spontaneous energy, Seungmin relied on data, repetition, and deliberate practice, spending hours alone in practice rooms filming himself to analyze his mouth shape and posture. When the Stray Kids survival show began filming in late 2017, Seungmin was selected as one of the members of the project group. The challenge he faced was formidable. He was a clean, traditional ballad singer who had to adapt to a self-producing group whose musical identity was being defined by three Ratcha's aggressive, experimental hip-hop and electronic sounds. Songs like Elevator required high-pitched, intense vocal deliveries that were completely foreign to his training. During the show's evaluations, Park Jin-young was exceptionally critical of the vocalists, looking for absolute stability under the physical strain of intense, high-energy choreography. JYP frequently evaluated Seungmin's performances, praising his consistent pitch and reliable technique, but also cautioning him not to become too clinical or rigid in his delivery. Seungmin responded to these critiques not by losing confidence, but by dedicating even more hours to practice, working closely with Bang Chan to adjust his vocal placement so that he could project his voice clearly while executing difficult choreography. He spent sleepless nights running on treadmills while singing to build up his cardiovascular endurance, ensuring his voice wouldn't shake during live broadcasts. In the studio, Bang Chan would often marvel at Seungmin's ability to adjust his vocal tone on command, shifting from a breathy, emotional whisper to a powerful, resonant belt within a single recording take. During the legendary JYP vs YG trainee battle, which placed the two rival agencies in direct competition, Seungmin faced the ultimate test of performing a vocal cover of Shawn Mendes's "There's Nothing Holding Me Back" under the critical gaze of Yang Hyun-suk. He delivered a performance that was widely praised for its vocal control, solidifying his reputation as a singer who could perform under the most stressful industry conditions. As the show progressed and the threat of elimination grew, Seungmin's role as the vocal anchor of the team became increasingly apparent. While the group's sound was characterized by its loud, experimental production and rapid-fire rap, Seungmin's clean, melodic vocals provided the essential balance, grounding the tracks with a warm, stable tone that made the music accessible to a wider audience. His voice acted as the perfect counterweight to the raw energy of the rappers, creating the dynamic tension that would define the signature Stray Kids sound. His dedication to his craft extended to his fellow members, as he routinely helped warm up their voices and run scales before major evaluations. He became a stabilizing force in the dorms as well, bringing his signature sense of order and quiet discipline to a household of high-strung trainees. By the time the show reached the final episodes, Seungmin had proven himself to be an indispensable part of the group's musical identity. The boy who had traded his pitcher's glove for a microphone had navigated the most demanding talent pipeline in the industry through sheer, systematic effort, demonstrating that consistency and work ethic are just as powerful as raw talent. Yet, as the group's core vocal foundation solidified, the lineup still required a unique, raw vocal color that could add a distinct international flavor to their sound, leading the search back to the very place where Bang Chan's journey had begun. Number 2. The deep voice from Sydney. Felix. Felix Lee was born on September 15, 2000 in Sydney, Australia, growing up in a quiet suburb where his daily life consisted of school, sports, and family. His parents, who were of Korean descent but had lived in Australia for a long time, were initially hesitant about their teenager moving halfway across the world to pursue a volatile career, but Felix's passion convinced them to support his choice. His Korean name, Lee Yongbak, was something he rarely used in his day-to-day life in Australia, where he was simply Felix, a teenager who loved music, practiced taekwondo to a black belt level, and enjoyed swimming in the Australian sun. Though he had never taken professional dance classes, his 12 years of training in taekwondo, which earned him a second-degree black belt and numerous medals at state championships, had endowed him with a high degree of body control, balance, and spatial awareness that would later accelerate his ability to memorize complex dance routines. He had no formal training in singing or professional dancing, and the structured world of Korean entertainment companies was a distant reality he only observed from afar. However, in 2016, a JYP scout happened to be in Australia looking for new talent and spotted Felix at a local shopping center. The scout saw potential in the 16-year-old's expressive face and unique proportions, offering him an audition on the spot. Felix, fueled by a mixture of curiosity and a sudden desire to explore his heritage through music, took the audition and passed, securing a trainee contract. In February 2017, Felix packed his bags and boarded a plane to Seoul, landing in a country where he could not speak the language, had no close friends, and did not understand the cultural nuances of the trainee hierarchy. The transition was immediate and brutal. Unlike Bang Chan, who had arrived years prior and had a long runway to gradually adapt to Korean society, Felix was thrown directly into the deep end, with only a few months of preparation before the company decided to launch the survival show. The language barrier was an invisible wall that affected everything he did. In the practice rooms, trainers gave instructions in rapid-scale Korean, and Felix had to rely on visual cues and translation help from Bang Chan to understand what was being asked of him. He sat in his dorm room late at night, long after the other trainees had gone to sleep, memorizing the Korean alphabet using flashcards and mobile translation applications. Bang Chan, taking on the role of both leader and translator, spent hours in the company's recording booths writing out English translations of every Korean rap verse, explaining the historical context and emotional weight of the words, so that Felix could connect with the material on a deeper level. Even more challenging was the music itself. Felix had to memorize Korean lyrics, understand their emotional meaning, and deliver them with perfect pronunciation while executing demanding choreography. When he rapped, his accent was noticeable to Korean ears, and he struggled to convey the natural rhythm and flow that the genre demanded. This linguistic struggle was compounded by the fact that he was also adapting to a completely different lifestyle, living in a dormitory with other trainees and spending up to 15 hours a day in practice rooms. Yet, what immediately caught the attention of everyone who heard him was his voice. Felix possessed an incredibly deep, resonant bass baritone voice that stood in stark contrast to his youthful, freckled, and delicate appearance. This duality was a double-edged sword. While it gave him a highly distinct vocal identity, JYP's music directors were not accustomed to writing parts for such a low register in standard idol pop music. During the filming of the Stray Kids survival show in late 2017, Park Jin-young frequently focused on Felix during evaluations, analyzing his performances with a critical eye. JYP recognized the visual and sonic impact of Felix's presence, but repeatedly pointed out that his lack of Korean proficiency was a significant liability for a group that needed to debut quickly. During the second mission of the survival show, where the members performed in three-person units, JYP remarked that Felix's rap flow felt disconnected from the beat, attributing this directly to the fact that his tongue and mouth were not yet accustomed to the rapid pronunciation of Korean syllables under pressure. JYP argued that if a performer does not fully comprehend the lyrics they are delivering, the audience will sense the disconnect, and the performance will lose its sincerity. The pressure mounted with every episode, and Felix worked tirelessly, writing the phonetic pronunciation of Korean words in English letters over his lyric sheets, and practicing his pronunciation until his voice was raspy. Despite his efforts, the gap in preparation was too wide to close in just a few months. In episode 8 of the survival show, following a mission where the trainees performed in units, Park Jin-young made the decision to eliminate Felix from the debut lineup. The announcement was a devastating blow to the team's morale, creating a wave of shock and grief that was palpable through the screen. The most emotional reaction came from Bang Chan, who felt a deep sense of personal responsibility for Felix as a fellow Australian who had promised to guide him through the system. After the cameras stopped rolling, Chan broke down in tears, holding Felix and apologizing in English, telling him to find him in the studio because he refused to leave him behind. This raw moment of brotherhood became a defining image of the group's journey, showing that their bond was not a corporate arrangement, but a genuine family dynamic. Felix's elimination, however, was not the end of his training. Instead of returning to Sydney, he chose to remain in Seoul, showing up to the company's practice rooms every single day to continue his vocal, dance, and language lessons. He practiced with a quiet, desperate intensity, determined to show that JYP's assessment of his readiness was a temporary state rather than a permanent limitation. The remaining 7 members also struggled with his absence. The choreography felt unbalanced without his physical presence, and the vocal arrangements lost the unique low-end grounding that his deep voice provided. Recognizing the group's strong desire to debut as a complete unit, and seeing Felix's relentless work ethic during his post-elimination training, Park Jin-young decided to give him and Lee No one final opportunity. In the show's live finale, the eliminated members were brought back to perform alongside the others, allowing the audience and the company to compare the group's performance as a 7-member unit versus a 9-member unit. Felix stepped onto the live stage with a renewed confidence, delivering his lines with a clarity and power that showed how much he had improved in his short time away. The live audience voted overwhelmingly in favor of the 9-member lineup, and Park Jin-young, acknowledging the undeniable chemistry and completeness of the full team, officially reinstated Felix. The boy from Sydney had overcome a complete language barrier, physical exhaustion, and the psychological trauma of public elimination to claim his place in the group. His deep voice would go on to become one of the most recognizable and internationally celebrated features of Stray Kids music, proving that sometimes the qualities that make you stand out the most are the ones you have to fight the hardest to protect. With the vocal core and the international pieces of the puzzle now firmly in place, only one final member remained to be found. A youngest member whose journey began with a failed audition, but whose bright smile would ultimately heal the group's deepest wounds. Number 1, the resilient youngest with the healing smile IN. Hyunjin was born on February 8, 2001 in Busan, South Korea. Growing up as the middle child of 3 brothers. As a child, Hyunjin possessed a natural charisma that led to him working briefly as a child model, an experience that taught him to face cameras without fear, though it provided no musical training. His early musical interests were unconventional for a future pop idol. He was drawn to trot, a traditional genre of Korean popular music characterized by its distinct vocal inflections and older demographic appeal. When he first sang a trot song during a JYP monthly evaluation, the judges were amused but bewildered, explaining that the heavy vibrato and stylized vocal bends of traditional Korean country music were incompatible with the modern, electronic, and hip-hop sounds that JYP Entertainment planned to produce. However, as he entered his teenage years, his focus shifted toward contemporary pop music, and he began participating in local talent showcases. In 2016, he decided to audition for JYP Entertainment, one of the nation's most prestigious music labels. The initial audition did not go as planned. The judges determined that his vocal and dance techniques were too unrefined for their immediate training program, resulting in an initial rejection. Despite the failure, the casting staff was struck by Hyunjin's visual presence, specifically his unique, fox-like eyes and a remarkably bright, warm smile that exuded a rare, natural charm. Instead of discarding his files, they archived his audition materials. Nearly a year later, the company contacted him again, inviting him to return for a second audition. This time, after months of self-study and practice in Busan, Hyunjin demonstrated sufficient progress to secure a spot in the trainee system. During his initial year as a trainee, before he permanently relocated his residence to Seoul, Hyunjin had to endure the exhausting routine of traveling back and forth between Busan and the capital city, spending hours on the KTX train every weekend. He would finish his school week in Busan, rush to the train station, spend the entire weekend training intensely in the JYP studios, and then take the late-night train back to Busan on Sunday to attend school on Monday morning, a cycle that left him chronically sleep-deprived and isolated from his childhood friends. At just 15 years old, he packed his bags and moved from Busan to Seoul, transferring to the School of Performing Arts Seoul, and entering the intense environment of JYP's trainee dormitories. As the youngest member of the trainee group that Bangchan was assembling, Hyunjin faced a unique set of challenges. He was younger than the others, less experienced, and forced to adapt to a high-speed training curriculum that assumed a level of prior preparation he simply did not have. The vocal demands of pop and hip-hop were vastly different from the trot melodies he had sung as a child, and his dance skills were significantly behind those of street cast dancers like Hyunjin or veterans like Lee No. To make matters worse, Hyunjin wore dental braces throughout his trainee days. This dental correction was not just a cosmetic detail. The metal brackets and wires caused constant, painful lacerations on the inside of his lips and cheeks, particularly during high-energy dance routines where sudden head movements forced the metal against his soft tissue. Singing with braces required him to constantly adjust his mouth shape and tongue placement to avoid lisping or losing vocal resonance, adding a layer of physical discomfort that most performers never have to navigate. In the practice rooms, Hyunjin struggled with basic vocal support, his voice frequently cracking under the physical strain of executing high-energy dance routines. When the Stray Kids survival show began filming in late 2017, his vulnerability became a focal point of the broadcast. Park Jin-young was consistently critical of Hyunjin's performances, noting that his vocal pitch was unstable, and his choreography lacked the sharp precision required for a professional stage. The physical environment of the JYP training evaluation rooms amplified his anxiety. He had to perform in a wide, mirrored studio under bright, sterile fluorescent lights, facing Park Jin-young's desk where every micro-expression and technical flaw was observed and documented. During the performance of School Life, a track that demanded a bright, energetic, and highly coordinated performance, Hyunjin was tasked with executing a center part that placed his vocal stability under direct scrutiny. During one of the early evaluations, JYP made an observation that would define Hyunjin's narrative on the show. He pointed out that even when receiving harsh, demoralizing feedback, Hyunjin continued to smile. JYP questioned whether the young trainee understood the gravity of the competition, or if he lacked the seriousness required to debut. This critique forced an emotional revelation that resonated deeply with the viewers and his fellow members. Hyunjin explained that his smile was not a sign of indifference, but a deeply ingrained coping mechanism. From a young age, he had resolved never to show his struggles because he did not want his teammates to worry about him. He smiled to hide his intense anxiety, his physical exhaustion, and the fear that he was holding the group back. His fellow trainees affectionately dubbed him the Desert Fox due to the distinct shape of his eyes, a moniker that quickly became a badge of honor and a symbol of his unique place within the group's visual identity. JYP's understanding of this defense mechanism shifted the dynamic of the evaluations, revealing the psychological weight that the youngest member was carrying. Rather than breaking under the criticism, Hyunjin became the emotional center of the group, prompting the older members to rally around him with fierce protectiveness. Bangchan spent hours after midnight in the practice rooms helping Hyunjin adjust his dance angles, while Seungmin acted as an informal vocal coach, running scales with him in the hallways before every performance. The threat of elimination was a constant shadow, But the collective determination of the team shielded Hyunjin from the worst of the isolation. The Sinchon busking mission took place on a cold autumn evening in a crowded public square, where the wind chilled his throat and the noise of the traffic threatened to drown out his monitor speakers. Performing in front of a live, unplaced audience that was only feet away, he had to deliver the chorus of School Life while executing rapid arm movements and footwork, knowing that a single slip would be captured on fan cameras and evaluated by the company's executive committee. In addition to School Life, Hyunjin had to perform the vocally demanding track Elevator in front of the Sinchon crowd, forcing him to hit high register notes immediately after completing intense, synchronized choreography. He delivered his parts with a newfound stability, and when JYP finally praised his growth and vocal control during the subsequent evaluation, Hyunjin broke down in tears on stage, releasing the months of suppressed pressure and anxiety he had hidden behind his smile. His progression was not a miracle of sudden talent, but the result of relentless, exhausting repetition behind closed doors. By the time the survival show reached its live finale, Hyunjin had transformed from a vulnerable trainee into a reliable performer who could deliver stable vocals and sharp choreography, while maintaining the bright, infectious energy that balanced the group's darker, heavier musical concepts. Park Jin-young later reflected that the decision to include Hyunjin in the final group was not based on immediate vocal perfection, but on the recognition that his unique vocal color and bright, resilient character provided the essential emotional anchor that would keep the group cohesive during their future career struggles. Park Jin-young and the public recognized that the group's identity was incomplete without its youngest member, officially confirming his place in the final lineup of Stray Kids. The boy from Busan who had failed his first audition had earned his place at the center of the stage, proving that resilience and emotional maturity can bridge any gap in experience. His journey completed the 8-member puzzle, cementing a lineup that would go on to challenge the boundaries of the K-pop industry and redefine what it means to stand together as a self-produced team.